I hate my hair today. One, it's just so dirty, so it's beyond able to have down. I had it in a bun earlier before I sprayed dry shampoo in it, and it looked so cute. It looked so good. And then I, of course, had to take it out to spray it with some extra dry shampoo, and then when I tried to put it back up, it wouldn't look good again. I have spent, I'm not even lying, like 10 minutes trying to get it to look okay. So I hate it, and I just felt the need to share with you guys that I hate my hair today. We're not here for that. Once again, we're never here for what I always drone on about in my intros. What we are here for is book recommendations. So, to the books. In case you are not aware, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, something that is super, super, super important to me. And I wanted to talk about some of my favorite romance books that have mental health representation that when I read them, I felt it deep into my soul. I personally love reading a book with strong mental health representation. I love watching a character struggle with themselves and struggle with their own mind because, you know, that's me. And yeah, I'm not really going to get in on here on like my personal life or my personal stuff, but I have struggled with my mental health since I was like going into 6th grade. So how old was I? Like 11 or 12 maybe? Personally, what I love to see in characters is like anxiety representation, accurate OCD representation, and depression. And that's what a lot of these books have in common today. Some of them are a little heavier, some of them are a little lighter. I'll kind of let you know as I go through them. So just in case whatever like you mentally can handle as you're going through. Obviously, a lot of these books are going to have triggers in them when they're talking about mental health, especially some talk about depression and suicide. So please look up triggers before jumping into anything that you're reading. I will mention like what is kind of specifically in each book, but also I don't want to be the sole person responsible for looking up your triggers. So please do research on your own as well before diving into any of these. But that's it, and let's jump in. Okay, first, my favorite book of all time. I talk about it in a ton of videos, but I literally couldn't not include it in this one, and that is Sweet Dandelion by Macaulay Smelter. I've said it once, I'll say it again. This book is fantastic. So this one follows Danny and Lachlan, and Danny is an 18-year-old senior in high school. She is held back a year because at her previous school there was a school shooting where Danny was shot and injured and her mother was shot and killed. So Danny took a year off to rehabilitate, and like physically she's pretty like well rehabilitated, but mentally she's still really struggling. And when she starts going to this new school now that she's living with her older brother, she starts meeting with a guidance counselor to kind of talk about her experiences and process her trauma. And that is where Lachlan comes into the picture. So this is taboo, age gap, student teacher kind of romance. But what I love so much in this one, this is a thick, character-driven book. When I tell you that I personally felt healed alongside Danny as we're going through this book, I mean it. You are with Danny through every setback, every step forward, every part of her journey. You're there in her mindset and with her in that moment. And it's so beautiful. One thing that I absolutely love, I love seeing characters at absolute rock bottoms and where they really don't see anything to come forward in their lives or like look forward to anything or just have kind of lost that will for life, and to see them come back from that to then have so much to live for and be excited about life and experiences and people again. It's so incredible. It's so satisfying, and you totally see that with Danny. So it does deal with PTSD, depression, anxiety attacks. I think that's kind of the gamut of stuff in here, but it's so good. Like Danny is just, this book will forever be like one of my absolute favorites. Next up, this one's kind of tricky because it is the second book in a series, but I mean, the series is literally one of my all-time favorites, but specifically in the second book is where we really get into the nitty-gritty on one of these characters' mental health, and that is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. So this is the second book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. You definitely have to read the first book to read this one. And I can't really say too much plot-wise because the first book has a lot to do with why Feyre is in the place that she is in this one. But Feyre, our main character, this is a fantasy series, but heavy on the romance. Feyre went through a lot in the first book, specifically at the end. You know, I don't really even know what I can say. She went through a lot of shit. And now where she is in this book, she is at a low. She can't deal with what she had to do in that first book. She doesn't have a way to process that. She's feeling very trapped, very just like, what is the point of life? Like she can't function well, and she's just in a very, very dark place. So this does again deal with like PTSD and depression, and she has a big problem with like feeling trapped, and it's so good. And again, you just see Feyre at an absolute rock bottom at the beginning of this book, and just wanting, and just almost just waiting for something to happen to her so she doesn't have to live like this anymore. And you see her by the end of this come completely back to life and find a new purpose, and it's so beautiful. Sarah J. Maas has incredible mental health representation across all of her series. Crescent City, our main character Bryce, we get a lot of stuff with her. Same with her Throne of Glass series, but I feel like Feyre's journey in particular is one that like just I'm very drawn to. So, and just one of my favorite series. It's so good. I love it. Okay, next up is a recent read for me, and that is Darlene Venom by Parker S. Huntington. So this one is a little bit different. You follow 3 characters for different parts of the book. So at the beginning of this book, you're following Kellen and Charlie, and they meet one night are they in 8th grade? They meet one night on the top of their school's roof. They both went there with the same purpose in mind, but didn't know that the other was going to be there. And when they show up, they kind of get talking, and neither of them ends up following through with their plans for the evening. And they decide like, hey, why don't we check in with each other once a year and just kind of see how we're doing, but like no communication in between. And so then you get them at the beginning of this book meeting every single year throughout high school. And you see in Charlie's POV that she's feeling better mentally, but you see in Kellen's that he just never is. And Kellen does end up committing suicide, and Charlie is kind of left reeling a little bit. And she's left with like this little bit of guilt. And anyways, we fast forward into the future a few years, which is where we spend the bulk majority of this story. And we're still with Charlie, but now we're also following Kellen's older brother, Tate. And Kellen had often mentioned how much he hated his older brother, Tate, to Charlie. So Charlie is well aware of the fact that Kellen hated Tate, and that Tate was maybe like a part of his choices potentially. And so it's like an enemies to lovers deal between Charlie and Tate, and they end up having to like run into each other for a few certain circumstances, and whatever the story goes from there. So this one deals really heavily with depression and suicide, especially at the beginning of the book. So definitely, like, it is heavy. So definitely be aware of that. Sweet Dandelion, I guess I didn't really say that so far. Sweet Dandelion is like pretty heavy. A Quarter Mist and Fury, not so much, I think, because it's in a fantasy setting. Like, even though you like feel down, it's still like not as like gray, I guess. Darlene Venom, I would say, again, is like pretty heavy of a book. I personally really liked how Kellen's story was told, and how he never once was like villainized throughout the book for the choices that he made, like by Tate or by Charlie. Next up, so this one is definitely a lighter one on the list. It maybe does have like a bit of a darker edge to it, but I don't think it's necessarily because of the mental health in it. And that is A Lesson in Blackmail by Katie Robichaud. So this one follows Evie and Nate, and Evie is a librarian at this one academy, like this very like fancy bougie academy that has like all these rich people there. And she's fresh out of college. She's 22, and both of her parents have passed away, and she is now like living, I think, she bought a house with like her inheritance and whatever, and she just has a lot of anxiety, and she really deals with just feeling like very anxious day to day. And she finds a reprieve in a certain kind of club every week. So she goes to this club every week to kind of let off some steam. But at school, she has this one student, Nate, an 18-year-old senior, who just makes it his mission to kind of make her uncomfortable a little bit. And his family like owns the academy, so he's kind of untouchable in her eyes. One night after school, he follows her. He decides to stalk her after school to see what she's doing on the weekend, and finds out that she goes to this club, and he ends up blackmailing her with that information for her to teach him everything that she knows about BDSM. They kind of enter into like a little bit of like a dom sub kind of situation. It is definitely shorter. It's more on the novella length side. And Nate struggles with OCD, so he really finds like they both find reprieve in that like dom sub lifestyle of her having anxiety and kind of needing to give over control to someone. And with his OCD, he really finds the like satisfaction of the like more dom side of the relationship. So good. So technically it's like, so yeah, it is taboo because it's student teacher, and it is age gap, like older woman, younger man, but it's literally 4 years, so it's not like a big age gap whatsoever. Evie does go to therapy, and like we do see a little bit of her therapy, and then she also ends up taking Nate too, and like he sees this therapist too. And I like that. I love therapy scenes in books. I love them. And yeah, this was really good. And yeah, I just really liked the way that, especially like Nate's OCD was portrayed in this. Okay, next up, this is one of the heaviest books and one of the darkest books on this list. Like overall, it's like a dark romance, not just because of like some of the things that the characters like have going on in their heads, but like circumstances, everything. So definitely be prepared going into that it is a very dark romance, and that is Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. So this one follows Dean and Cora, and they are longtime enemies. They don't get along. However, Dean is marrying Cora's older sister. They are engaged. So Dean's kind of always around and they just have to deal with each other. And one night they are out at a bar celebrating some sort of like birthday dinner, whatever, and everyone ends up leaving except for Cora. She sticks around for a while, and then when she needs a ride, she tries to find one and has to end up calling Dean to come and pick her up from this bar, and he agrees, so he comes and picks her up, and then when they are on their way home, they are run off the road, abducted, and taken hostage into this serial killer's basement, and they are kept as captives together in this basement. What they go through in this basement is absolutely horrible. What is done to Cora is horrible, and what their captor makes Dean do to Cora, it's really fucked up. And then in the latter half of the book, when they are out, I guess that's kind of a spoiler alert, but also I feel like if you like, it's kind of obvious that they would not just like die by the serial killer if it's a romance. They are out. They both are really struggling to come to terms with what happened in their captivity, not only just in like the trauma around being kidnapped and held hostage by a serial killer, but what they had to do in there and what bond was formed and how that affects Dean's relationship with his fiance and how like that affects Cora and her sister's relationship. It's a whole messed up situation. And this one deals really strongly with PTSD, depression, suicide, anxiety, kind of like a large gamut of stuff that Dean and Cora both have to face. It's so good though. One of my favorite dark romances ever. He was just trying to crawl in the pocket of my suitcase. Like, you don't need to do that, dude. I kind of forgot where I was at with this one. Yeah, again, you just see, especially with Cora, a character that once again is just like at her absolute, bottom and just does not want to do it anymore. And to see her come back to life again, so satisfying. Such a good journey to go on with the two of these characters. Okay, next one on the list. This is definitely the lightest one. So if all of these ones so far have sounded like a little too dark, a little too serious for you, that is totally fine. This one is like the lightest hearted one of the bunch. And that is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this one follows Danny and Zaf. And Danny is a teacher at a university. I think she's like a graduate student teaching. But anyways, she's teaching a class, and in the building, Zaf is the security guard, and they have like a good friendship. Zaf is always kind of flirty with Danny, but Danny doesn't really pick up on that from the beginning. But anyways, there's an incident where Danny ends up getting stuck in an elevator during a fire drill, and Zaf ends up like rescuing her and carrying her out like fireman style, and someone takes a video of it and it goes viral and people are like, oh my god, are you dating, whatever, and they decide to start fake dating from this. So it is like that kind of deal. I love a fake dating romance. I love when it starts to turn into the real romance. It is so freaking satisfying. Anyways, Zaf does struggle with anxiety in this, and I loved just how his anxiety was like interspersed with the story. It never felt this overall heaviness hanging over the story, but it was just like it popped up in certain situations as anxiety does. And especially I believe it's when he's about to give an interview on a radio show and he has a panic attack outside and like Danny's there for it. And it is so like, I read this panic attack and I was like, you could just tell I'm like Talia Hibbert at some point in her life has to have had a panic attack because it was so accurately written. I was like, I feel like you're inside my brain watching Zaf try to like process this. It was so good, and enjoyed seeing it in a male main character because I feel like we get a lot of mental health representation with women, and like even in media in general, like it's a lot more okay for women, I feel like, to talk about their mental health, but in men it's still like considered a no-no and like don't talk about your feelings, like whatever. That is such bullshit, and I just love seeing it in a male main character. And like, guys can have anxiety too. It's not exclusive. It's not an exclusive club that us women are having over here, you know? Okay, so that's the 6 that I wanted to talk about today. I do definitely have more, but I just wanted to kind of, like I said, with some of my other rec videos, I do like to keep them to a bit of a shorter list, because when it gets to be too many, like I know when I'm watching, I get too overwhelmed and I'm just like, that's too many. I could definitely do like another video about with this like kind of recommendation. I hate to say like trope, but I guess with this, with like dealing with mental health in it in the future, because I definitely have more. But yeah, also let me know down below, what are your favorites? I'm always looking for more books that have to do with mental health. And yeah, that is it for today, and I will see you when I see ya.